The truck tore through the winding roads, each turn pulling them further into the unknown. Drexler's eyes flicked between the rearview mirror and the horizon ahead. The fire in the rearview had faded, but it was only temporary. They were not out of danger yet. Briar, silent in the passenger seat, clutched her knees to her chest. Drexler's gaze softened as he watched her, the weight of what they were all carrying pressing down on him. This wasn't supposed to be her reality. Not at her age. But now she was wrapped up in it, her world changed forever. "Uncle Quentin?" she whispered, breaking the silence. Drexler glanced at her. "Yeah. Are we going to be okay?" His heart tightened. The question was simple, but the answer was complicated. How could he assure her? How could he promise anything? He didn't know the answer. He didn't know if they would make it through this. But he couldn't tell her that. "We'll be fine," he said, the words leaving his mouth with a conviction he didn't feel. "Just keep your head down and trust me. We'll get through this." She nodded slowly, her small hands still gripping the seatbelt like it was a lifeline. The truck screeched around another corner. Drexler felt the pull of the road beneath him, his grip on the dashboard tightening. He didn't need to look to know they were still being followed. The headlights in the distance confirmed that much. "We can't keep running," Lauren said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. She shot him a quick look. "We need to make a stand. We have to face them head-on." Drexler knew she was right. Running was no longer an option. The attackers, they had been on them from the start, always one step ahead, always calculating, waiting for their moment. But that moment had passed. "Where do we stop?" Drexler asked. "We don't have time to plan this. We'll be walking into a trap no matter where we go." "We don't have a choice," Lauren answered. "There's a warehouse up ahead. I've got contacts there. We can regroup, fortify it, maybe get the upper hand." Drexler's eyes narrowed. It was a risk, but it was their only option. "All right, head to the warehouse." The road stretched on, empty for miles, and as the truck picked up speed, Drexler's mind raced. What had they gotten themselves into? Who was pulling the strings? And why had it escalated so fast? The truck roared as it reached the edge of the warehouse district, a cluster of old industrial buildings, dark and abandoned for years. The perfect place to vanish, or to die. Lauren made a sharp turn, sending the truck fishtailing into a narrow alleyway between two rusted metal buildings. She slammed the brakes, and the truck screeched to a halt in front of the warehouse's side door. Drexler was already out of the truck, his hand on his weapon, his mind scanning for any signs of movement. He could feel the sweat prickling on the back of his neck, the fear growing, not for himself, but for Briar. They'd made it this far, but it wasn't enough yet. "Stay close," he told Briar, his voice low but sharp. "Stay inside the warehouse. No matter what happens, you stay there." Briar nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but she didn't argue. Drexler quickly gestured to Lauren, and they moved inside the dark, echoing warehouse, their footsteps barely a whisper against the concrete floor. The room was silent except for the occasional creak of metal. The smell of dust and old machinery filled the air. Drexler's pulse quickened as his mind worked, calculating their next move. They needed a plan, but everything depended on the next few minutes. Lauren crouched by a stack of crates, her eyes scanning the shadows. Drexler positioned himself near a metal pillar, ready to move at a moment's notice. Then the first shot rang out. It was close. Too close. The sound shattered the tension. Drexler immediately ducked, his eyes darting to where the shot had come from. A figure moved in the dark, silhouetted by the faint light of a single flickering bulb overhead. Another shot followed, narrowly missing Drexler's shoulder. He moved quickly, his training kicking in. He fired back, but the figure disappeared behind a stack of crates. "Damn it," Drexler muttered under his breath. He was used to facing threats, but this wasn't just any enemy. These people were organized, determined, and they knew how to keep their distance. Whoever was pulling the strings wasn't messing around. Lauren cursed softly, keeping her position. "We've got company. More coming." Drexler's mind raced. He needed to get them out, but the escape route was compromised. There was no way out of the warehouse without being seen, and he wasn't about to let Briar become a target. "Briar!" Drexler called sharply, his voice carrying across the warehouse. "Get to the back now." Briar, small and frightened, peered out from behind the door. "Uncle Quentin." "Now Briar, don't hesitate." She darted off without another word, her small feet pattering as she made her way toward the rear of the warehouse. Drexler's focus never wavered. He could feel the heat of the situation escalating, the pressure mounting. He knew time was running out. More shots echoed through the building, followed by the distinct sound of boots against the concrete floor. They were closing in. Suddenly, there was a loud crash behind him, and Drexler spun, his gun drawn. A man emerged from the shadows, face obscured by a mask. Drexler's instincts kicked in, and he fired 3 shots, precise and deadly. The figure dropped to the ground, but Drexler didn't stop. He didn't have the time. Lauren moved to cover him, firing back at another figure who had entered from the side. The warehouse was alive with gunfire now, the sound deafening as they fought for their lives. But Drexler's mind wasn't on the fight. It was on Briar. He could feel the weight of her safety pressing down on him. Just as he turned to check on her, he heard a shrill scream. It was Briar. His heart stopped. He spun around, eyes searching the shadows, fear coursing through his veins. She was just behind him, she had to be. But the warehouse was a maze. He couldn't see her. "Briar," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Briar, where are you?" Then, from the far corner of the warehouse, he saw her. She was crouched behind a stack of crates, her eyes wide with terror. A figure was moving toward her, slowly, deliberately. Drexler's breath caught in his throat. Without thinking, he moved. His gun was in his hand, but it felt useless in this moment. He was too far away. His legs burned as he sprinted toward her, closing the distance in seconds. He didn't care about the gunfire. He didn't care about anything except getting to her. The figure raised a weapon, aiming at Briar. No! Drexler was faster. He reached them just as the figure fired. Time slowed as the bullet tore through the air. But Drexler was already there. He pushed Briar aside, taking the hit for her. The world around him blurred, the pain searing through his chest like fire. His legs buckled beneath him, but he caught himself, gritting his teeth as he dropped to one knee. Briar was safe, but he wasn't. He turned to see the figure closing in. But before he could move, Lauren appeared, gun blazing. The figure crumpled to the ground, lifeless. "Drexler!" Lauren shouted, rushing to his side. "Stay with me, damn it!" But Drexler's vision was already fading. Briar's cries echoed in his ears, but they felt distant, muffled by the pounding in his head. His body was failing, his strength waning. "Uncle Quentin," Briar sobbed, her hands gripping his arm. "Please don't leave me." And then, as darkness closed in around him, Drexler felt a quiet peace. He had done all he could. He had kept her safe. He just didn't know if it had been enough. The world seemed to tilt, the edges of Drexler's vision narrowing as his body began to betray him. The gunshot wound in his chest was burning, the sharp pain spreading, a constant reminder that he wasn't going to make it unless something changed. Briar's cries were distant, a faraway echo that clawed at his fading consciousness. Her small hands gripped his arm, but his own strength was slipping, the weight of the situation pulling him under. "Uncle Quentin, please don't leave me." Briar's voice cracked through the haze. It was the last thing he heard clearly, and it tore through him like a knife. Lauren was beside him, her hands pressing against his chest, trying to staunch the bleeding. "Hold on, Drexler. Damn it, stay with me," she urged, her voice rough with desperation. He barely had the energy to respond, his lips moving but no words coming out. His body was shutting down, his mind slipping away from the chaos surrounding him. The warehouse, once a place of shelter, now felt like a tomb. It was closing in, suffocating them all. "I'm not going anywhere, Briar," he whispered, his voice strained, barely audible over the ringing in his ears. He tried to move his hand to reassure her, but it felt as if his body had turned to stone. Lauren's breath was steady but uneven, her fingers pressing harder. "Help's on the way, Drexler. Hold on." He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that they'd get out of this, that Briar would be okay. But with every passing second, the possibility of survival seemed to slip further and further from his grasp. The loud sound of footsteps echoed across the warehouse, and Drexler's heart skipped a beat. Had they been followed? Were they about to face more enemies? His mind raced, adrenaline spiking as he tried to focus, to make sense of what was happening around him. The footsteps were getting closer, and then, out of the shadows, a figure emerged. Drexler's heart pounded in his chest, his gun arm instinctively reaching for his weapon. But the figure wasn't armed. They were wearing a dark suit, their face calm yet determined. Drexler squinted, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar face. "Agent Drexler," the man said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and exuded a quiet confidence. "We need to move now." Drexler's instincts flared. "Who the hell are you?" His voice was a rasp, barely audible. The man didn't flinch. "I'm Agent Thomas Ward. I've been following your case for some time, and we're not alone." Drexler struggled to stay conscious, his breath shallow. What's going on? His voice cracked, frustration building. I need to know who's behind this. Who's pulling the strings? Ward's eyes flicked to Lauren, and then to Briar. We don't have time for explanations, Drexler. They've been playing both sides. The people who started this, they're closer than you think. Lauren's gaze hardened, a mix of confusion and suspicion clouding her features. What do you mean? Who's behind this? Ward glanced over his shoulder, as if sensing the urgency of the moment. I can't explain everything now. You're in danger. All of you. He looked down at Drexler, his expression softer but still urgent. I've been tracking their movements. You've been targeted by the highest levels. And I'm not talking about some local officers or criminals. I'm talking about people within the system itself. Drexler's heart sank. The system? Ward nodded. People who are trying to cover up something big. This isn't just about you. It's about something much bigger. The realization hit Drexler like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a matter of personal retaliation or some isolated incident anymore. It was a coordinated effort, a conspiracy with deep roots. Lauren's voice was sharp. So what the hell do we do now? Ward turned toward the warehouse exit, signaling them to move. We get out of here. Now. They're coming. And they've got people everywhere. If we stay here any longer, we won't make it out alive. Drexler didn't have the strength to argue. His body was burning with exhaustion, his mind foggy. But his instincts, honed through years of service, kicked in. He didn't have much time left, but Briar, he couldn't leave her. He tried to push himself to his feet, but his legs gave out beneath him. Lauren caught him, her grip firm as she helped him up. Briar was already moving ahead, her small form looking over her shoulder as she waited for him to catch up. You're gonna make it, Uncle Quentin, Briar said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Drexler wanted to believe her, but it was hard. The pain in his chest was unbearable, and his vision kept flickering in and out. But he kept moving, kept putting one foot in front of the other, determined to get them both out of here. Ward led the way, moving with purpose, his steps quick but calculated. They navigated through the maze of crates and machinery, moving as quietly as possible. The sound of footsteps behind them was growing louder, but Drexler didn't dare look back. He focused on the one thing that mattered, getting out alive. They reached the back exit of the warehouse, the cold night air hitting their faces as they stepped outside. The sight of the truck brought a momentary sense of relief. But it was fleeting. The figure who had been following them was back. He emerged from the shadows, his face familiar. Drexler's blood ran cold. It was Ray Delmore, the officer who had started all this. But now, he wasn't alone. A group of men stood behind him, weapons drawn. Ward didn't hesitate. Get in the truck now, he barked, his tone fierce, commanding. Move. Lauren pushed Briar forward, her hands shaking but resolute. Drexler's legs felt like jelly as he stumbled toward the truck. He could hear the footsteps behind them growing louder, the sound of weapons being raised. And then, just as they reached the truck, the world seemed to explode. Gunfire erupted from all directions, deafening in its intensity. Drexler was thrown forward by the force of the bullets, his body slamming into the side of the truck. Blood poured from his wounds, soaking through his shirt as the truck's engine roared to life. Ward fired back, his aim precise, but the attackers kept coming, relentless in their pursuit. Drexler could feel the coldness of his own blood, could hear Briar's frantic cries. Everything seemed to slow down. Time itself seemed to freeze as his body went limp, his strength finally slipping away. Briar's face was the last thing he saw. Uncle Quentin, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Don't leave me. And then, as the truck sped away, the world went dark. The world was a blur of light and sound, distant voices and flashing images. Drexler's body felt as though it was floating, detached from reality. He couldn't make sense of the pain, of the faces flashing in and out of his consciousness. The blood loss had taken its toll, the edges of his vision dimming, but there was still a sense of urgency in the air, a reminder that the fight was far from over. Stay with me, Drexler, a voice said, sharp and familiar. It was Ward's voice, but it sounded muffled, like he was underwater. You've been through worse than this. Hold on. Drexler couldn't respond. His mouth was dry, and his chest burned with every breath. But he could feel the rough jolt of the truck as it tore down the road, a sense of motion keeping him tethered to some semblance of reality. He focused on that, the rhythm of the truck's tires on the road. It was something constant, something that kept him from slipping into the darkness completely. Behind him, Briar's sobs broke through the haze. Please, Uncle Quentin, she whispered. Please don't die. I need you. The words pierced him like a dagger, bringing clarity to his foggy mind. Briar. She was the reason he had to survive. He had to make sure she was safe. He had to see this through. The truck came to a screeching halt, jerking him forward, and he gasped, the pain in his chest flaring to life. "We're here," Ward said, urgency in his tone. "We need to move. Now." The doors to the truck opened, and Ward was there, helping him out. Drexler's legs were shaky, his body barely responsive, but he forced himself to stand. Lauren was there, her face pale but resolute. Briar, still clinging to her, was wide-eyed, terrified. Drexler's heart broke as he looked at her, her little hands grasping Lauren's jacket, the same fear in her eyes that he had seen in so many others. Ward motioned for them to hurry, leading them toward a small, nondescript building hidden in the darkness. It was the kind of place no one would notice, no one would care about. Perfect for hiding, for regrouping. But Drexler knew it wouldn't be long before they were found. The people after him, after all of them, would not stop. Inside, they were met by a few others, agents who were clearly prepared for a fight, but who looked equally as worn down by the fight they had been thrust into. Ward quickly motioned them to take positions, while Drexler collapsed into a chair, his head spinning, trying to make sense of everything. Lauren took a seat next to him, her eyes still hard with resolve, but her hands shaking. Briar, too, clung to her, not willing to let go, her gaze flicking between Drexler and Ward. "Who are they?" Drexler rasped, his throat dry, barely able to form the words. "Who are these people?" Ward looked around at the agents, then back at him. "People in the highest places. The people who are supposed to protect the nation, to enforce the law. But they're the ones pulling the strings. The ones who are making sure things stay broken. They don't want change. They want control." Drexler's mind was reeling. "So it's a conspiracy. It's not just some rogue officer or a few bad apples." "No," Ward said firmly. "It's deeper than that. Delmore? He's just a pawn. A useful one, but a pawn all the same. There are others, people in power who are actively suppressing the truth, controlling the narrative. They can't afford for you to keep digging. They want you silenced." Drexler's heart sank. "And Briar?" Ward's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, and then hardened. "She's the future. She's the reason you can't stop now. She's the reason they'll stop at nothing to erase what you've learned, to make sure it's buried." The weight of the situation settled over Drexler like a heavy shroud. It was bigger than he had imagined, darker than he had ever thought. But there was no turning back. Not now. Lauren stood up, her voice sharp. "So what do we do now?" Ward turned toward her, his face impassive. "Now we take the fight to them. We expose everything. Every last piece of it. But we need to be smart. They're watching every move, every person you trust. We need to be careful." Drexler felt a pang of frustration. Careful. How many times had that word been used against him in his career? It was never about being careful. It was about being right. About being strong in the face of adversity. But now, with Briar depending on him, it was about something more than just being right. Ward stepped toward the door. "I'll get the next part of the plan in motion. Stay here. Lay low. We'll move when the time is right." Briar's voice broke through the tension. "Will we be safe here? Are they coming after us?" Drexler looked down at his niece, the young girl who had been dragged into this nightmare through no fault of her own. He wanted to promise her that everything would be okay, but the truth was he didn't know. There were too many unknowns, too many questions. "I'll make sure you're safe," Drexler said, his voice steady but filled with an unspoken promise. But even as he spoke those words, a nagging feeling twisted in his gut. They weren't safe here. None of them were. The people after them had resources, influence, and power on their side. And Drexler had no illusions. They weren't going to stop until they had him, until they had all of them. Minutes later, the door burst open. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light outside. A shadow moved quickly, and Drexler's heart skipped a beat. It was Delmore. But he wasn't alone. Two other men stood behind him, both armed, both with cold, calculating expressions. Delmore's eyes were full of malice, but there was something else, something darker, more menacing. His hands were steady, the gun in his hand aimed straight at Drexler. "You really thought you could get away?" Delmore's voice was low, venomous. Drexler's body tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm. The room went silent, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. The agents in the room positioned themselves in an instant, but Drexler raised a hand, signaling them to hold their ground. This was his fight. Briar's voice broke the silence, small but clear. "Uncle Quentin, what's going on?" What's happening? Delmore's gaze flicked to Briar, and a twisted smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. This little girl? She's nothing but a pawn in a bigger game. Drexler's vision blurred with rage, his body screaming at him to stand, to fight. But he could barely move. Who sent you? Drexler's voice was thick, strained, but filled with fury. Who's pulling the strings? Delmore's smile faded, replaced by something far colder. You'll find out soon enough, Agent Drexler. But not in the way you think. With a flick of his wrist, Delmore gave a signal, and the room seemed to close in on Drexler and his team. It was the endgame. The final confrontation was here. And it was only just beginning. The reckoning, final chapter. The air was thick with the weight of impending danger. Delmore stood in the doorway, his presence like a dark cloud hanging over the room. Drexler's hand tightened around his sidearm, but his muscles screamed in protest, the blood loss from earlier clouding his thoughts. He knew he couldn't make any sudden movements, not yet. Not with Briar so close. His eyes flicked over to the men behind Delmore, two armed agents, both in black tactical gear. Cold, emotionless, as if they'd been forged in the image of their leader. Drexler's heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was sharp, calculating. Delmore's voice was low, almost a growl. You really thought you could escape, Drexler? Thought you could stand against the system? His eyes flicked briefly to Briar, lingering on her for a moment before snapping back to Drexler. You've made a lot of noise, but you don't realize just how deep this goes. It's beyond you, beyond all of us. Drexler took a shallow breath, his eyes never leaving Delmore. I know enough to take you down, Delmore. You're just another pawn, another cog in the machine. And I'm not afraid of you. Delmore's laugh was bitter, hollow. You don't get it, do you? You're already dead, Drexler. The system doesn't let go of its own. You're a liability now. You and your little crusade. Everyone you've touched, everyone you've tried to protect, is already marked. Including her. He motioned toward Briar, his smirk widening. You think we haven't been watching? The words hit Drexler like a blow to the gut. He felt the familiar surge of anger boiling up inside him, the sharp sting of betrayal. But it wasn't just Delmore. It was the whole system. The corruption that ran deep, far beyond what he had imagined. And now, it was coming for his family, for Briar. Drexler's jaw clenched. You won't get away with this. You'll never silence me. Delmore's eyes flashed with something darker. You're already silenced, Drexler. But if you want to go down fighting, I'll give you that. It'll make for a nice ending to your little story. In that moment, Drexler knew this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about everyone who had been a part of the fight, the retired officers, the students, the ones who had believed in him. It was about Briar, about protecting her from a world that had already begun to turn its back on the truth. The tension in the room was palpable. Ward's hand twitched at his sidearm, ready to draw, but Drexler stopped him with a single look. He needed to be the one to end this. No one else. You're wrong, Delmore, Drexler said, his voice low, steady. It's not over. Not by a long shot. You think you can control everything? The truth is bigger than you. Than all of you. For a brief moment, Delmore's face flickered with something like doubt, something unfamiliar. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same icy calm. Enough talk. It's time to end this. With a swift motion, Delmore gestured for the agents behind him to move. The room filled with the sound of clicking weapons, the cold steel of firearms aimed at Drexler and his team. Briar gasped, taking a step backward, her small body trembling. Drexler's mind raced, trying to think of a way out. Then, in a single fluid motion, Ward leaped forward, knocking one of the agents to the ground. The shot rang out, the sound deafening, but it wasn't directed at Drexler. Ward was already on the move, taking down the second agent with a clean strike, disarming him in seconds. Delmore's eyes widened in shock. You're making a mistake, Drexler, he spat. But Drexler wasn't listening anymore. His focus was on the immediate threat, on the man standing before him. He had to finish this, had to take Delmore down before anyone else got hurt. Drexler lunged forward, ignoring the sharp pain in his side as he tackled Delmore to the ground. The two men collided in a burst of motion, fists and knees flying. The room erupted in chaos as the remaining agents scrambled to regain control, but Drexler was beyond reason, beyond pain. His world narrowed to the man beneath him, to the face of the person who had tried to destroy everything he had fought for. Delmore struggled beneath him, his fingers desperately clawing at Drexler's throat, but Drexler was stronger. He slammed Delmore's hand away, gritting his teeth. You've lost, Drexler spat, his voice cold. This ends now. Delmore's face twisted in fury, his breath ragged. You think you're the hero? You think you're the one who's going to save everyone? You're nothing, Drexler. Just a footnote in the story. The real power is beyond you, and you'll never see it coming. Drexler's heart skipped a beat. The real power? What the hell was Delmore talking about? He had to know more. But the words were interrupted by the sharp, sudden sound of the door slamming open. A new figure stepped into the room. It was a man, tall and imposing, dressed in a dark suit that shimmered under the dim lights. His eyes were sharp, his expression unreadable. Drexler froze. Ward, too, halted, his eyes narrowing at the newcomer. Director Halston Blake? Drexler's voice was a rasp, disbelief and confusion tangled together. Blake's gaze flicked over to Delmore, and there was a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. It's time to end this, Agent Drexler. But not the way you think. Drexler's chest tightened. What the hell is going on here? Blake's lips twisted into something between a smirk and a grimace. You've been chasing shadows, Drexler. The truth is complicated. The truth is, you're not the only one who's been used. The air felt like it was closing in on him. Drexler's mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Everything he thought he knew, everything he'd fought for, it was all a lie. Delmore wasn't the end. Blake was just as deep in the conspiracy, pulling strings from behind the scenes. You've been in this from the start, Drexler said slowly, a realization dawning. You're not a bystander. You're the architect of this mess. Blake's eyes hardened, a cold smile creeping across his face. I didn't create it, Drexler, but I know how to use it. A surge of rage flooded through Drexler. He couldn't hold back anymore. His vision blurred with the weight of betrayal and pain, but the clarity of one thing stood out. He couldn't let this stand. Ward moved forward, but Drexler shook his head, stopping him. I've got this. With a deep breath, Drexler reached for his weapon, locking eyes with Blake. This ends now. And just as Drexler took a step forward, gun raised, the lights went out. The room plunged into darkness. Drexler's senses heightened in an instant, every nerve on edge. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant shuffle of movement. His hand tightened around the grip of his weapon, every muscle in his body primed for whatever was coming next. He couldn't see, but he could feel the tension in the air. The realization that everything had changed hit him harder than the blow he'd received earlier. Blake, Delmore, everyone, none of them were who he thought they were. A door creaked open, followed by the click of footsteps, then another. Too many of them. Drexler moved instinctively, crouching low, his back pressed against the wall as he tried to gather his bearings. His heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline flooding through him. Don't shoot, Blake's voice echoed through the darkened room. It was calm, almost too calm. I'm not here to fight. Drexler didn't trust him. Not anymore. The man's betrayal was woven into the very fabric of this mess. He wasn't about to let his guard down now, not with Briar still close by, and certainly not with the unknown lurking in the shadows. You think I'm just going to stand here and listen? Drexler's voice was rough with anger. You think I'll let you get away with this? Another voice cut through the darkness, sharp and cold. Drexler, this has gone far enough. You can't fight this system. You never could. Drexler froze. The voice was familiar. Too familiar. His stomach twisted in realization. Delmore, he hissed, every part of him aching to end this right now. He couldn't see him, but he could feel the threat, the venom in Delmore's voice. We're not the enemy, Delmore continued, his voice low, almost pleading. You think you're the good guy, but you've only been playing into the system's hands. You don't know the truth, Drexler. A bitter laugh escaped Drexler's throat. Truth? You want to talk about truth? You've been lying from the start, Delmore. You were never a cop. You're a pawn in something much darker, aren't you? I'm more than a pawn. I'm the one who kept it all in check, Delmore spat. You think you can stop it? You think your little mission of exposing the truth will change anything? Drexler's mind raced, but he kept his breathing steady. He couldn't let the chaos cloud his judgment. Briar was safe for now. He had to focus on this moment. I'll stop it. I'll stop all of it. The words were barely out of his mouth when he heard movement again, closer this time. He wasn't alone in the dark anymore. Suddenly, a flare of light cut through the room, blinding him for a moment, and then the lights flickered back on. The room came into focus. Drexler squinted against the brightness, his gun still raised, his eyes searching the now revealed faces in the room. Blake stood with a smirk, flanked by two more men in dark suits, but there was something different in the way they held themselves. They weren't here to talk. We need to end this, Drexler, Blake said, his voice colder than before. The longer you fight, the worse it gets. You have no idea what's at stake. You're lying, Drexler shot back, his voice low but filled with certainty. Whatever you think you're protecting, it's not worth this. Not worth this destruction. Blake stepped forward, his hands raised in mock surrender. The world doesn't work the way you think it does. It never has. There are forces at play that you'll never understand. Drexler's grip on his gun tightened, his eyes narrowing. He'd heard enough. He wasn't going to let these men speak in riddles anymore. The time for talk was over. Suddenly, Delmore lunged at him from the shadows. The movement was too fast, too close. Drexler barely had time to react, instinctively firing 2 quick shots. The sound of the gunfire echoed in the small room, followed by the heavy thud of Delmore's body hitting the floor. Blake froze, his expression unreadable. The silence that followed felt like a suffocating weight, pressing down on Drexler. He couldn't believe it. He hadn't intended to kill him, but it was done. And the weight of that moment sat heavy on him. Delmore. Briar's voice cracked, and Drexler's heart clenched. He turned, his eyes meeting hers. She was standing there, her face pale, eyes wide with shock. She was scared, her body shaking, but she wasn't backing away. She was still here, still standing tall. "Briar," he said softly, his voice steady as he motioned for her to come closer. "You're safe. It's over." Briar looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of confusion and fear. She stepped forward slowly, hesitating for a moment before finally closing the distance. Her small hands reached for his, gripping them tightly as if she could anchor him to this moment. "You did it, Uncle Q," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You stopped them." Drexler didn't answer. Instead, he focused on Blake, who was now backing away, his hands still raised in the air as if trying to protect himself from Drexler's anger. "You think you've won?" Blake sneered. "This is just a small piece of a much bigger puzzle. You'll never expose it all, Drexler. No matter how hard you try." Drexler didn't blink. "I've already exposed enough." Blake's eyes darted to the door, to the faint glimmer of a dark figure waiting just outside. Drexler followed his gaze, his senses on high alert. And then it hit him, the realization, the final piece of the puzzle. The shadow in the doorway wasn't just another agent. It was someone else entirely, someone he hadn't seen coming. A figure stepped into the room, a familiar face, one he hadn't expected to see here, not like this. "Not now." "Director Blake," the newcomer said, his voice calm and controlled. "I believe it's time for us to talk." Blake's face paled, his expression faltering. He took a step back, but there was nowhere to retreat now. "You," Drexler said, his voice cold as ice. "I knew it." The figure in the doorway straightened, revealing himself fully. It was Halston Blake's superior, and he had been orchestrating this entire mess from the very beginning. The room seemed to freeze as the figure in the doorway stepped fully into view. Drexler's mind raced, the realization settling over him like a weight that was impossible to shrug off. He'd expected to face Blake again. He hadn't anticipated this. "Director Blake," the new figure said, his voice smooth and authoritative. "It seems we've reached the end of the line." Blake's face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The composure that had once seemed so unshakable, so certain, was crumbling before Drexler's eyes. The man who now stood in the doorway was older, his graying hair combed neatly, his suit perfectly tailored. But it wasn't his appearance that made Drexler's pulse quicken. It was the recognition in his eyes. The newcomer was someone Drexler had seen only once, briefly, a meeting that had seemed meaningless at the time. The head of a powerful federal agency, a man with a reputation for maintaining control over everything and everyone under his command. And now, this man was the final link in a chain Drexler had been trying to unravel for weeks. "You," Drexler said, his voice sharp. "You're the one behind it all." The man in the doorway, Elliot Finn, smiled a thin, practiced smile. "I thought you'd figure it out sooner or later. But I suppose, with the weight of everything on your shoulders, you couldn't see the forest for the trees. You've been manipulating this entire investigation." Drexler's words were a slow burn, the truth crystallizing in his mind. Blake's fall from grace, Delmore's involvement, even the footage. This was all part of your plan. Finn stepped forward, his eyes cold. "I'm afraid you're too late to stop it now. The damage is already done." Drexler's hand tightened on his weapon, but he didn't raise it. Not yet. The entire room felt like it was closing in, every move carrying the weight of his past decisions. He'd been chasing shadows all along, and now they had led him here. "What do you want?" Drexler demanded. His voice was barely more than a growl. "What's your endgame?" Finn's smile widened slightly, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm not in this for power, Drexler. I'm in this for control, for creating a world where no one can ever threaten the system, where everyone plays by the rules I set. And how many people have to die for you to get what you want?" Drexler's voice broke through the tension in the room, fierce and unyielding. "How many families have to be destroyed?" Finn didn't flinch. "That's the price of progress, Agent Drexler. And you were too naive to understand it until now." Drexler's blood ran cold. The man standing before him was nothing more than a puppet master, moving the pieces of the chessboard with no regard for the lives caught in the crossfire. "You really think you've won?" Drexler said, his voice steady but fierce. This isn't over." Finn's eyes glinted with something darker. "It is, Drexler. You've already lost. You've been a pawn in this game since the beginning, and now you'll find out how far I'm willing to go to keep control." The air seemed to thicken, suffocating. Blake, who had been standing motionless, finally stirred, his eyes darting from Finn to Drexler. His entire demeanor seemed to break down, and in that moment, Drexler saw the truth. Blake was nothing more than a cog in a machine far larger and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Drexler's mind raced. He wasn't going to let Finn win. Not like this. Not after everything. Suddenly, a soft voice cut through the tension. "Briar. Uncle Q." Her voice was shaky, uncertain, but strong. "What's going to happen?" Drexler turned, his heart catching in his throat. She was standing there, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. She hadn't moved from his side, and in that moment, Drexler realized what was truly at stake. He couldn't let Finn win. Not for himself, not for Briar. Not for anyone who had ever been hurt by the corruption that had festered in the system. "Briar, I need you to trust me," he said, his voice softer now but firm. "You've got to get to safety. Now." She hesitated, her eyes flickering between him and Finn. Her small hands tightened around his. "I'm not leaving you," she said, voice filled with determination. Drexler swallowed, his heart swelling with pride and fear. But he knew he couldn't keep her here, not with everything that was happening. Not with Finn still holding all the cards. "I won't be long," he promised her, his hand gently brushing her cheek. "I'm not giving up, not now. Just trust me." She nodded, though her eyes were still filled with uncertainty. He watched her move to the side, out of the direct line of fire, his mind never leaving her for even a second. "All right, Finn," Drexler said, his voice low and controlled. "What do you want from me? What do you need to keep all of this from unraveling?" Finn's gaze narrowed, studying Drexler with calculated intensity. "I don't need anything from you, Drexler. You're already too deep. The game is over. It's time for you to step aside." Drexler's eyes flicked to the two agents still standing by the door. He could feel the shift, the subtle change in the air. Finn's smirk was everything Drexler had come to expect from men like him. Cold, detached, and full of the kind of confidence that could only come from knowing he was one step ahead. But Drexler wasn't going to let him control the narrative any longer. A beat passed, then another, and as the silence stretched out, Drexler did what he'd always done best. He adapted. He thought, he acted. Without warning, he moved. The first agent was on him before he could blink, but Drexler was already shifting, already anticipating the movement. He swung his elbow back, connecting with the agent's chest in a tight, brutal strike. The man stumbled back, eyes wide in surprise. The second agent reacted too quickly, pulling his gun. But Drexler was faster, spinning to the side and reaching for his own weapon, the motion smooth and practiced. In one fluid motion, he disarmed the agent, twisting his arm until the man yelped and dropped his weapon. Drexler turned to Finn, his gun aimed directly at the man's chest. His pulse pounded in his ears, his mind focused on nothing but this moment. "You're done, Finn," Drexler said, his voice unwavering. But Finn only smiled, that cold, arrogant smile that had haunted Drexler from the beginning. "Not yet," Finn said softly. "Not yet." The room seemed to close in on him, and for the first time, Drexler felt a flicker of uncertainty. But in that split second, he knew what he had to do. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. He wasn't done. The tension was unbearable, suffocating the very air. The room, a stark, sterile space, seemed to pulse with the weight of the moment. Drexler's gun was steady in his hand, but even as he locked eyes with Finn, the unsettling feeling in his gut only deepened. The smile on Finn's face, cold and unbothered, made Drexler's blood run colder. "You've made a mistake," Finn said, his voice a deliberate drawl. "You can't win this, Drexler. You never could." Drexler's grip tightened on his gun, but he didn't lower it. The words rang in his mind, each syllable a dagger, twisting deeper. He had been fighting this battle for so long, chasing shadows in the dark, But it was clear now. Finn wasn't just a puppet master. He was the very force that had kept Drexler trapped in the game for all these weeks. "I'm done being your pawn, Finn," Drexler said, his voice sharp, controlled. "I'm not playing anymore." The silence stretched between them, thick with anticipation, as though the entire world held its breath. Finn didn't flinch, his stance unyielding. His eyes narrowed slightly, studying Drexler, as if he were examining a piece on a chessboard. "You never understood," Finn mused, his tone now tinged with something darker. "The bigger picture. The one you and your little friends are too blind to see. This country? It's a machine, Drexler. A well-oiled machine, and I'm the one making sure it runs smoothly. People like you, you're nothing but anomalies. Distractions." Drexler's chest tightened with the weight of Finn's words. The disgust in his voice was unmistakable. Finn saw himself as a savior, as someone who believed in control, in power above all else. And he would stop at nothing to maintain it. "Enough talk," Drexler growled, his patience waning. "What happens now?" Finn's smile didn't waver. Now you make a choice. You walk away from this, or you die here, and the world goes on without you." The threat hung in the air, cold and final. The weight of it pressed down on Drexler's chest, but even as his mind raced through every possible outcome, his resolve only hardened. He couldn't back down now. He couldn't let Finn have the final word. "You're wrong," Drexler said, his voice calm, but steel laced through it. "This world isn't yours to control. Not anymore." Finn's eyes flickered for a moment, his facade cracking just slightly, before the cold smile returned. "We'll see about that." In that split second, Drexler acted. Before Finn could even process the movement, Drexler had crossed the distance between them, disarming Finn in one fluid motion. His gun clattered to the floor, and in the blink of an eye, Drexler had Finn on the ground, his knee pressing firmly into the man's back. The room erupted into chaos as Blake's agents scrambled, but Drexler didn't flinch. "Stay down," Drexler commanded, his voice low and commanding. He hadn't come this far to fail now. Not when the stakes were this high. Not when everything had been leading to this moment. Finn struggled beneath him, but Drexler kept him pinned. His heart was racing, but his focus never wavered. He couldn't afford to let his emotions cloud his judgment now. He had to finish this. "You're done, Finn," Drexler repeated, the words feeling like a finality. Finn let out a low chuckle, one filled with venom. "You think this ends here? You're wrong. This is just the beginning." Drexler's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Finn's grin only grew wider, like he knew something Drexler didn't. The man was calm, even in the face of defeat, and that only made Drexler more uneasy. "You've just made yourself a target," Finn said, his voice steady. "You've exposed the truth, but now they'll come for you. The ones who really run things. The ones you can't touch." Drexler's grip tightened on Finn's back. "Who?" Finn chuckled again, the sound sharp and hollow. "The ones who own this country, Drexler. The ones who hold the real power. You think I was the mastermind? I was just a cog in their machine." Drexler's heart skipped a beat. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. This wasn't just about Finn. This wasn't even about the corrupt system Drexler had been fighting for so long. This was bigger. Much bigger. Before Drexler could respond, the door to the room burst open, and Briar's voice rang out, full of fear. "Uncle Q!" Drexler spun, his heart dropping in an instant. Briar was standing in the doorway, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. Behind her, a group of agents entered, but Drexler barely registered their presence. His focus was entirely on her. "What are you doing here?" Drexler demanded, his voice laced with panic. I couldn't leave you," Briar said, her voice trembling. I heard what he said. He's going to." She didn't finish her sentence. The sound of a gunshot rang out, deafening in the small room. Briar gasped, and Drexler's heart skipped a beat. His instincts kicked in, and he rushed toward her, but the shot wasn't aimed at her. It came from one of the new agents entering the room, their face hidden behind a mask. Drexler dove for cover, but the moment felt like it stretched out forever. Briar screamed as the agent moved, gun raised, and Drexler acted on pure adrenaline. He threw himself at the agent, disarming him in one quick motion. The gun fell to the ground, but the agent wasn't finished. He lunged at Drexler, fist connecting with his jaw, but Drexler was already reacting, bringing the agent to the floor in a brutal maneuver. "Get down!" Drexler shouted, pulling Briar behind him. He could feel the urgency in her trembling form, and he refused to let anything happen to her. "You don't get it, do you?" Finn's voice was cold as he stood, brushing himself off. "This is bigger than you. They will come for you. You think you've won, but you haven't. Drexler's pulse was racing, but his mind was clear. He couldn't afford to think about Finn's words. Not now. Not when Briar's safety was on the line. Briar, Drexler said, turning to her, his eyes fierce. You need to get out. Now. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but Drexler didn't have time to comfort her. He had to finish this. He had to expose Finn and the people behind him. I'm not done, Drexler said, looking back at Finn, his jaw clenched. Not by a long shot. But even as he said the words, the realization hit him. Finn was right. This was only the beginning. The true power behind everything, behind Finn, behind the agents, behind the conspiracy, was still out there. Still watching. And Drexler had just walked straight into their trap.